This is Heritage Week, and throughout the region, children are taking part in activities which will increase their understanding of Australian history and culture. Last year at Kelso Public School, all classes from Kinder to Year 6 learnt about the olden days in their social studies lessons leading up to Heritage Week, and some culminated their studies with a special class activity in the week. The Thursday was set aside for the whole school to celebrate Heritage Week together. Everyone dressed up in colonial costume, and in the morning classes were timetabled to see a display of craft and project work in the hall and to visit a museum set up in the library. The museum was made up entirely of articles brought in by the children: household implements, clothing, machinery, toys, furniture, books and photos. Parents joined their children for a picnic lunch and stayed on to enjoy a concert of bush dancing and other traditional entertainment. In today's program, we'll be joining some of the classes for their Heritage Week activities.
Today we're going to finish off our silhouettes that we started last week, and this is the craft work we're doing for Heritage Week. When you go back to your tables, you have to find your lace, and some people have flowers, other people have sequins, and you have ribbons, and you're going to arrange them onto the silhouette so that it looks like this one here that's finished. Right,
Year 2 teacher Diane Poole told us how her class had prepared for Heritage Week.
The children on Thursday will be dressing up for Heritage Week, and we've been talking a lot about the clothes and sorts of things they wore. We thought this craft activity was a good opportunity for the children to take a good look at those sorts of clothes that they wore. And so the children had to cut out a silhouette and paste it onto a coloured piece of paper, and then they decorated it with trimmings that were worn in that time. I also got the children to do some research on what life was like when their grandparents were children, and they had to go along and interview one of their grandparents and ask them sorts of things like where they got their water from, what sorts of schools they went to, what school was like in that time, what sorts of clothes they wore, what sorts of transport they had in those days, what they did for leisure time. And then they had to write all that down, and they brought it along to school to discuss it with me, and we looked at how their lives have changed compared to just their grandparents' lives.
Well, the first thing that I found out that was interesting was they had no heaters, and the teacher had to come to school early and chop the wood. I found out that for their sport they had hockey and horse riding and running, and she had 2 brothers and 3 sisters, and they had a big house and many friends. For food they had a damper and corned beef, and they had mud walls and bark and bush schools, and for the water they had to go to a river, and then entertain with music at home.
And then just simply make an accurate sketch of that particular building, but don't forget to write down what building you are doing.
Year 4 students went on an excursion to find out more about the history of Bathurst. Teacher Mike Craven explained what they were doing.
For the last 2 weeks we've been involved with a unit of work titled What Was Life Like in the Early Days? Now, to allow the children to become more aware of the history of their own area, we've brought them into Bathurst today to have a look at some of the historical features of Bathurst City itself. We've got 3 groups all together. One group is in Macadie Park, and they're studying the various fountains and monuments to be found there, and then they'll also the story relating to the history of the early prison or the jail will be told to them. There's the group, as you can see here, in King's Parade, which is concentrated on the Carillion and the 2, well, the Evans Memorial and the War Memorial on the eastern part of our park. And then the third group is in the museum itself.
Year 5 students dressed up in period costume for a day of colonial activities at Walleroy, a grand Victorian home on the outskirts of Kelso. Year 5 teacher Chris Walker and her family are the present owners of Walleroy.
Heritage Week this week at Kelso Primary is most important. We are celebrating it, and living in an 1860-1880 home, it was a marvellous opportunity to show the children the rooms, how people lived, and the general environment of people living in the 1860s. They get a look right through the house. They have a wander through the orchard. They play old games, hoops, hopscotch. They also have had lots of fun making damper and making butter, which everyone was very thrilled about because it does work.
The old drawing board. This is the recipe for your damper, which you're going to be eating for lunch and for afternoon tea. You're going to be making a damper between 2 of you, and that will serve for 4 people.
Anne Koomans was in charge of the damper making.
Now, what you have to do.
First off, I explained that they were going to be weighing in the old measurement of pounds and ounces. We had an old scale here. We looked at that and discovered how to get to half a pound, which they needed. We were measuring the milk out, I should say, in fluid ounces again. The children then just went through the steps of weighing out their flour, mixing the bicarb and the baking powder and the salt in, and then mixing it all up with the milk. And then they got together with their floured hands and kneaded the dough up and put it into a shape that they thought was a good damper shape, and then took that into the fuel stove to be cooked.
Shelley, could you tell me what you're doing?
Well, we've got a jar full of cream and we're shaking it until it turns into butter.
How's it going?
Good. We've nearly finished. Making butter. At one go. Yes! I think we just made butter.
The game we're playing is hopscotch, and you have to throw a thing like this into a square, number 1, and then you jump over it, and where there are 2 squares, you put 2 feet in them, and when you get to home, you turn around, go back until you get to square number 2. You pick up your thing and you jump back to the end of the line, and then it's the next person's go, and so on.
What you do is you grab yourself a piece, and you would put some butter on it, and then you put either some honey on it or some syrup, and go and sit somewhere and enjoy it. Okay, so everyone stand around this side, please. And
Chris Walker told us about the history of Walleroy.
William Lee was one of the very first settlers over the mountains in about 1818, and he bought this property about 1837, and there were buildings here which we believe are the 2 small back wings. The main house went up about 1860, 1870, and a series of Lees lived here. One interesting one was John, who unfortunately at the age of 35 burnt to death in one of the rooms. He went to bed ill one night and had his candle and his nightshirt caught fire, and he was burnt to death. So that's our only real trauma in the house, but there are no ghosts. In the 1860s, most important were these. What are they? And there were 2 more here and here, and that one was bigger, and that was a great big one. Who can tell me what the bells were for?
For ringing the maid or whatever?
Yes, there was a wire that went from the bell up into the ceiling, across the ceilings, and down beside each door in the 5 main rooms. And when the maid heard, she'd say, "The mistress is in the drawing room, I'd better take her morning tea," and away she'd go. That was their telephone system, because it's such a big house you couldn't yell down the stairs to the maid. Okay, so there are our servants' bells. If you have a look here, you can find the glass is all bumpy, and sometimes it even has glass. Here, look at this. It even has a bubble in it, and that's because in those days they had to make the glass by hand, and they couldn't make big sheets of glass. They were much too hard. They simply couldn't do it, so they made small sheets of glass, and they were also very, very expensive. It's a fascinating place because it has been modernised in Victorian times. It still has its original servants' bells and its original shingle roof under the iron, and has wonderful Victorian features and some interesting colonial type features too. The gentlemen were having their port and cigars in the dining room, the ladies withdrew, and they withdrew to the withdrawing room, which has been shortened to drawing room, and this is where they would come. And the drawing room was basically the ladies' area, and it has a lovely white marble fireplace because it's much prettier than a dark marble fireplace. It would be in a pretty colour. It would have lots of decoration. See all the colours up on the ceiling, Rose? Lots of colours up there. And it's a light, pretty room for the ladies. And they would have their morning teas and afternoon teas here. They would entertain their friends when they came for a visit, and they would sit and do their tapestry and their embroidery in this room. This was not the bathroom because people in the 1860s did not have a bathroom. This was a bedroom that they simply made into a bathroom much later. But this is a washstand, which would have been in your bedroom. And in the morning when you woke up, you would come up, the maid would make sure the basin is full of water. You would pour the water into the bowl, and you would wash yourself in the water, dry yourself with a towel and walk away, and the maid would come up later and clean it all up and make sure everything was nice and neat and tidy again. So that is the way people washed in those days.
What do you hope the children will gain from today's experience?
Oh, I think the understanding that maids and servants were most important in those days, and we have to live without them now. Just the grandeur of the way some people lived, and of course we'll have to go back to school now and learn how most of the other people lived, who were the servants, which I guess is where we'd have all been, unfortunately. But just to give them a taste of life a little different than their own now, and their heritage.
What was the best part of the day for you?
Making the damper and eating it. I don't really know. All of it practically. All the games and cooking the damper and going through the house and learning things about the house. Learning about the place and having fun with the games they used to play in the olden days, and also dressing up like they used to.